In his eulogy to the late civil rights icon, Representative John Lewis, former President Barack Obama called for a renewal of the Voting Rights Act. He also denounced attacks on Americans' ability to vote.
We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that's going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick.
The former president's comments came just hours after President Trump continued to spread misinformation about mail-in voting. He suggested that the November election should be delayed, quote, until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. Legally, the president has no power to delay the election. Such a move requires the consent of both chambers of Congress, as written in Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution. The 20th Amendment also dictates the president's term ends on January 20th, no matter what. So for more on all of this, I want to bring in CBSN political reporter, Caitlin Huey-Burns in Lewis, Delaware. Caitlin, good to have you with us. So what has been the reaction from lawmakers, particularly Republican ones, state parties, Joe Biden, anyone on board with the idea that the election needs to be delayed?
Hi, Lana. The short answer is no. You're hearing from Republicans and Democrats saying that there is no way that the president can delay the election. You mentioned that he does not have the constitutional authority to do so. It's important to remember that our elections are conducted not at a federal level, but at the state and local level. Those are the people that decide how elections are conducted. The president does not have the authority to push it back. It also is really interesting to hear from Republican members of Congress, Republican governors in battleground states saying that the election will not and should not be delayed, including Republican members up for re-election in November as well. So this is a conversation that nobody thinks is good to have, and it raises a lot of questions about why the president is talking about this now, heading just under 99 days until the election.
And that's really what I want to ask you about, Caitlin. Why is the president saying this? What is his goal attacking mail-in voting? Clearly, there's the pandemic going on. We've heard him attack mail-in voting. We've heard him attack all different types of voting in the past. But is there something in particular that's motivating this?
Well, this is not the kind of rhetoric that comes from a campaign that thinks that it is going to win in November. So I think that's an important backdrop. We see Biden leading Trump in battleground state polls by some significant margins. And so you could imagine that this rhetoric coming from the president could be reflective of that. We still have a while to go until the election. But it is really important to note that his previous comments disparaging mail-in voting, raising doubts about the integrity of the election, can really have damaging effects in terms of how the public is internalizing this information. And that's why we've been focusing our reporting on what is going on at the state level and what is going on with mail-in voting. And a couple of points to make clear for our voters. First, there is no universal mail-in ballot system. As I mentioned, elections are conducted at the state and local level. You have 5 states that conduct their elections by mail, and you also have 29 states that say you don't have to have an excuse to vote absentee or vote by mail. So we're going to see in November, because of the pandemic, a lot of voters may not feel comfortable going to the polls and will want some kind of option, whether that's early voting, whether that's voting through the mail, voting absentee, or actually showing up on election day. So that's important to note, that we will have certainly a scaling up of mail-in voting, but it won't be the only way that people can vote. We also have to note that we have talked to election experts, election attorneys, state and local election officials who have told us about the steps taken to ensure the integrity of the ballot. So when you mail in your ballot, there are a variety of different security measures in place to prevent any kind of intervention and to ensure the integrity of your vote. There are, however, going to be a lot of challenges heading into November because we're going to see more people vote absentee than we have seen before. We just look to the recent primaries in key battleground states to show that a lot of these states have to scale up very quickly, and that puts additional burdens on the Postal Service. It puts additional burdens on voters who are trying to figure out how to do this for the first time. And that's why we're hearing from election officials who are saying it also takes a while to count all of these ballots coming in. So we may not have the results on election day, and that does not undermine the security and integrity of this election. And that's why there are lots of concerns about what the president has been saying yesterday and over the past several weeks, questioning potentially the results of the election, and that's what's raising alarm bells.
Yeah, I think that it's important to help separate out these arguments about fraud, voter fraud, that we've heard perpetrated many times falsely, from what are in fact some serious concerns as we're looking at more mail-in voting. And in fact, 4 Democratic senators issued a statement today demanding answers from the U.S. Postal Service about reports that they're changing service policies that might have significant impacts for voting by mail. What do we know about this? And tell us more about how it might impact the November election.
That's a really important point, Lana, and this comes as the new Postmaster General, who is a donor to the Trump campaign and a close ally, has taken over and has proposed a series of reforms that have raised some concerns about whether that would stall anything involving the Postal Service. The Postal Service is going to play a huge role in this election in terms of making sure these ballots that are sent in and delivered on time. So that's going to be a concern. And I've been asking election officials in these battleground states, what should voters know heading into November? And also we should note that early voting starts in places like Michigan and Minnesota in about 50 days. So the election is actually closer than we think. And the number one thing that these election officials have been telling us is to read your ballots very carefully and look at the date, the postmark dates. They also say that if there are drop boxes in your counties, and a lot of counties will provide them, make sure you put your ballot in that drop box because that is going to go directly to who it needs to go to, and it doesn't require postage. They also say that if you do plan to mail in your ballot, give yourself enough time, maybe 2 weeks, to be able to make sure it gets there in time. So we're hearing from election officials trying to make clear to voters that this is a safe and secure process, but to give yourself time, make sure you read all the directions, fill out the ballot properly, and make sure, most importantly, you sign it, because we saw in the primaries a big reason for some ballots being rejected is because they were missing a signature or didn't have a verified signature.
What a terrible way to lose your vote by not following directions or not calling for your ballot early enough in some states. All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you.